Hello, welcome to your first Algebra 2 flipped video. We're going to focus today on section 1.1, which has to do with expressions and formulas. Our objectives for today are really to use the order of operations to evaluate expressions. We're not going to worry so much about this use and transform formula, so you're welcome to just cross that out. But the idea behind evaluating expressions is that you really want to replace each of the variables that you see with the value they tell you to, and then use the order of operations to simplify that down into a single number. And so we're going to practice several of these together in the notes, and then you'll have an opportunity to practice some additional problems in class. So for example number 1, it gives us this expression, the quantity x minus y to the third power plus 3, and they want us to replace all of the x's with 1s and all of the y's with 4s. So that will be the very first thing that I do here. I'm going to replace the x with the 1 minus 4 cubed plus 3. So now I have no more variables left, only numbers, and then I'm going to use my order of operations to solve. Here it says for step 1 to evaluate expressions inside grouping symbols. Well, in this case the grouping symbols are the parentheses, so inside the grouping symbols would be 1 minus 4, which is negative 3 to the third power plus 3. The next step says to evaluate all powers, and so we're going to take negative 3 to the third power. So that would be negative 3 times negative 3, which is positive 9, and then positive 9 times negative 3 is a negative 27 plus 3. Now, I want you to pay attention to this concept of taking a negative number to a power. It won't matter as much with the third power, and we'll talk more about why in class, but if I take negative 2 and square it, I get positive 4. But if I leave off those parentheses and say negative 2 squared, I get a negative 4. And so I get very different answers in my calculator depending on how I type it in. And so which answer I get is really important. Here, I'm telling the calculator that the value negative 2 is being squared. Okay? Just like here that the value inside the parentheses, which happen to be equal to negative 3, is being taken to the third power. On this second one, all that I'm squaring is the 2. Without the parentheses, that negative actually comes at the end. So 2 squared is 4, and then I add the negative on at the end. So that's a very different way of considering how to take care of a power in your calculator. So those parentheses make a big difference. The next step in my order of operations here would be to multiply or divide from left to right. There's no multiplication or division left in my problem. And the last step here is to add or subtract from left to right. So I'm going to do negative 27 plus 3, which is a negative 24. Now, if you have a scientific calculator, it's going to know how to do order of operations for you, so you can always check. I'm going to do parenthesis 1 minus 4, raised to the, that was this little caret button, third power, plus 3. So my problem here looks just like this one here, all the same parentheses and everything. Hit the answer and I get a negative 24 here. So let's take a look at another problem. Let's look at example number 2. So here I have f plus g squared minus 3g when I replace 5 for f and 2 for g. So I'm going to work that problem out as well. So here I'm going to say 5 plus 2 squared minus 3 times 2. And so the first step in order of operations is still to evaluate expressions inside the grouping symbols. Well, I added grouping symbols here, but there's nothing to do inside the parentheses. So I don't have anything to do for step 1. Step 2 is to evaluate all powers. So 2 squared is going to give me 4. So 5 plus 4 minus 3 times 2. Notice that the only thing I'm changing is that step that I was doing. Everything else looks exactly the same. Then I need to multiply or divide from left to right. So my only multiplication or division is right here. So I'm going to say 5 plus 4 minus 6. And then the last step is to add and subtract from left to right. So the first thing I'm going to do is 5 plus 4, which is 9, minus 6. And 9 minus 6 is 3. So I can always double check that. I'll go back to my calculator here. And I'm going to say 5 plus 2 squared minus 3 times 2 gives me 3, which is the answer I got. Let's skip number 3. If you'd like, you can take a moment and try that problem on your own. The solution to that problem will be posted on the notes that are posted on the assignments calendar. But we're going to skip down to example number 4 here. For example number 4, it asks us to evaluate this expression, and this one's a little bit more complicated than the ones we've seen before. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to do my work over here to the side. I'm going to say 8 times 5, which was my value for x, times negative 2, which was my value for y, plus negative 1 to the third, all over negative 2 squared plus 5. Now, the piece that's a little bit confusing when it's written this way is that there is assumed to be grouping symbols around the numerator and grouping symbols around the denominator, which means I should do everything in the numerator first, everything in the denominator, and then at the very end I'm going to do division, because that's what that fraction bar means. So that's what I'm going to do in this case. So I've got my grouping symbols. I'm going to focus on the numerator and denominator. There's no additional grouping symbols to focus on inside here. All of the parentheses that I have are indicating multiplication. I can't evaluate the power, so I'm going to do that. So I'm going to say 8 times 5 times 2, negative 2, excuse me, plus, and then negative 1 to the third power is going to be negative 1 times negative 1, which is positive 1, times negative 1 again, which is a negative 1. All over, and then I can do this power as well, negative 2, remember that negative's inside the parentheses, so negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4 plus 5. So I've taken care of powers. Then I'm going to multiply and divide from left to right. Well, the only multiplication and division I have is right here. 8 times 5 is 40. 40 times negative 2 is negative 80. So I've got negative 80 plus a negative 1 in the numerator. I'll leave those brackets, over 4 plus 5. Well, now I'm going to add in the numerator and add in the denominator, because that's my last step that you would see back up at the top. So I'm going to get a negative 81 over 9. And at the very end here, I can do the division. So negative 81 divided by 9 is going to give me a negative 9. There are 3 additional problems on your note packet, number 3, number 5, and on the back of this page, number 6, that you can practice on your own. But we also want to take a look at some word problems. Evaluating expressions with word problems is not any different than what we've already been doing. You just have to pay attention to what the values are and how they are represented in the variables. So here I have this equation of A equals 1/2 the height times the sum of the bases, so base 1 plus base 2. So these little subscripts are just telling us that those are the 2 bases. They want us to find the area of the trapezoid, which is A. If the lengths of the bases are 13 and 25, which means that B1 can be 13 and B2 can be 25, and then the height is 8. Many times in problems like this, they're going to tell you H represents the height. So my height of 8 meant my H was 8. Then it says that B1 and B2 represent the measures of the bases. So these were the 2 lengths of bases. I plug those in here. So a lot of times in a word problem like this, they will tell you what those variables represent, and then you need to do the job of matching them up. So I'm going to do just what I did before. I'm going to replace H with 8, and B1 with 13, and B2 with 25. And so then I use my order of operations to solve. I work inside the grouping symbols first, which means I should add here first. So I'm going to get 1/2 times 8 times 13 plus 25 is going to give me 38. And then I multiply from left to right. So 1/2 of 8 is 4, and 4 times 38 should give me 152. And since we're talking about an area, I'm going to say meters squared. So on your own, try number 8. We're going to ignore numbers 9 and 10 for our purposes, so you can cross those out. Try number 8 on your own, number 6 on your own, as well as number 3 and number 5. Attempt those problems the best you can. You're welcome to check your work on the notes that are completed and plugged in on the assignments calendar.